you don't see our students, but I think there's 20 or 30 students here, all MFA students, and they, our guests, are going to listen to you talk, and then they'll do their questions in chat. Is that how it's going to go, Jen?
Oh, okay.
We can do chat, or we can pop them on the screen.
Okay. So
I'll
Dan,
ask them what they want.
what you need to know is, like, having you come here is sort of like having Paul McCartney or, you know, some rock star show up, because they are all such fans of Modern Love and they all want to be in Modern Love. So anything you can say is going to be so appreciated. I thank you so much for stopping in and doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, it's good to
So
see.
should I, we have from when until when?
Jen, it ends at 5:15, I think, or 6:15.
6:15. Yep.
Okay. So I mean, I can just talk for a while first about my work and the history of the column a little bit, and what the kind of thing I typically tell to people who are interested in writing for it. And I don't know how long that will last, but then I'm happy to answer questions for as long as, you know, for the whole rest of the time. So yeah, it's too bad that we aren't in person. That would have been really nice.
I know. We're going to take you to dinner and all sorts of fun.
No free dinner out of it. I'm going to have like Cheerios again tonight.
You're on your own, buddy.
So if your students are fans of Modern Love, then they must also be fans of yours, Anne, because Anne has the distinction of having appeared in Modern Love more than any other writer. And I can't remember if that's 4 times.
Either, I think it's 4, maybe it's 5. It's 4 or 5. I don't know.
It might even be 5. And we finally had to cut you off. Like it just it wasn't going to be allowed anymore. And because, you know, everyone deserves a turn. And you know,
I'm greedy though. I have an idea.
But and I think I wanted to cut you off earlier, but a couple more essays came in, and it was just like, it was too hard to say no. I couldn't quit you. But Anne is a fabulous essayist and a good person to learn from, and a warm present and an engaging teacher. So you guys are all really lucky.
Thank you, Dan.
So Modern Love began in 2004, and it was a column that, it was a project that started with, it was the result of my wife and I having edited essay anthologies, and they were about, those anthologies were inspired by trouble in our marriage, where she was facing the difficulty that a lot of, you know, women with little kids who are trying to have a career and a marriage and all of that, try to have that all work harmoniously with marriage and career and family, and finding it very frustrating, and talking to her friends, and they all found it frustrating. And she saw that there was an opportunity to create an anthology of voices on this subject. And so she did that, and the book was called The Bitch in the House. 26 women tell the truth about sex, solitude, work, motherhood, and marriage. And anthologies typically don't sell that well, but hers became a New York Times bestseller and just was good and did well, and opened the door for me to do a mail response, which I felt backed into the corner and sort of had to do. So I did the male version, which was called The Bastard on the Couch. 27 men try really hard to explain their feelings about love, loss, fatherhood, and freedom, I think it was. So those 2 books together, especially done by husband and wife, got you know, a lot of media attention. And among the people who covered it was the New York Times style section and the style editor, Trip Gabriel. And they did a story on us, and then they came to, he called us up after the story and said, I have this idea about starting a column that continues this kind of work, but more broadly, that's about relationships more broadly. The Times, I guess, earlier had longer form personal narrative in the Hers column that was occasionally called About Men. That had sort of shrunk down into what became the Lives column in the back of the magazine. The Lives column now no longer even exists. But he missed that sort of longer form ability to tell a story, a little fuller, a little richer. And he wanted to do that in Styles and thought, because of our track record with these two books, that we were the people to do it. So we took that on as a couple. My wife was working on a novel at the time, and it pretty quickly became evident that it was going to be a one-person job, not a two-person job, and she didn't want to do it. And before the column even launched, we started in the summer of 2004. It launched at the end of October in 2004. And before that time, she'd dropped out. We'd gotten together a little collection of 4 or 5 essays by then to launch it with. And she dropped out and sort of handed me the reins. And I thought it would be, and the editor told me that it would be most likely a sort of a year to at most 3-year job. And I can't quite believe it became my life. Like, this is now 16 years later, and it's still going, and in a lot of ways stronger than ever, more readers than ever, and more sort of offshoots and ways of telling these stories. And I think a lot of the credit for that goes to our early decision to open it up to have it be an open submission and not a assigned column, and have it just be truly open, like just totally ignore people's writing credits and just see what these stories were and let that dictate what the column would be. So because that's where the fresh material comes from, and that's where you get people's most important story, which after a while I sort of realized I was wanting to publish people's most important story. And that's not always the case, but I think it is almost like 2/3 of the time. And established writers have often told that story a million times already. But newer writers, not necessarily younger writers, but newer writers who are new to writing at any age, often have that story, like that's what they have, like that's what they want to break through with. So there are a lot of them out there. So the column continued for I don't know how many years. I was doing it as a contractor up in Northampton, Massachusetts, where I am now, for a lot of years. And then must have been in like 2016, 2015, it became a podcast, and that took it to a different level in terms of audience and exposure, and also stuff that started to demand more of my time. And I started going down to New York. We'd moved here from New York, and I started going down to New York a lot more once that started, and it led to doing events and just more meetings and all kinds of stuff. So eventually I ended up getting a base in New York too, and then went on staff at the Times and started going in every day. And so for the past 3.5 years or so, I've been spending my weeks in New York and my weekends in Northampton, and really working. Before, I was just this isolated person who would be on the phone with people or on email and whatever. But working in the building, I've really become sort of a working journalist, and in addition to Modern Love, have done a lot of projects that are, again, reader-generated content, whether it's short narratives about about sexual consent in college, which we did a couple years ago, to we did 2 projects around the pandemic of people isolating alone or isolating as a couple and what that did to their relationships. And so there's a lot of talented, energetic people at the times where it's fun to work as a team, honestly. Like it's really, it's a lot of fun to work, to be part of a team and be able to collaborate instead of doing everything on my own. And through this time, I continued my sort of founding principle, just in terms of work ethic with the column, is that I would open every email, consider every essay, and respond to everybody. And that really came from my own frustration of being a struggling writer for, I don't know, pretty much from when I was left college until I was in my early 30s, and sending stuff off and never hearing back, or sending to literary reviews and not hearing back for a year or 2 or whatever. But more frustrating was never hearing back at all, because you just didn't think that the stuff was read. And any place I sent to where I never heard back, I never sent again, because it felt like beating your head against the wall. So I sort of made that, like, I didn't consider myself the best writer in the world, but I didn't want people of my ability to send and then never send again. I wanted them to have faith in the process and have trust in the process. And on top of that, if I was going to ask people for stories that were really vulnerable and really important, like, it's one thing to send off a humor column or a riff on something, and where the writer's maybe less invested, or it's more about style or something. But to really get, if the column's going to really be about vulnerability, and then you're not going to hear back, it's just really demoralizing, and could even be hurtful. So that was the sort of founding promise. And I've managed to keep that up. I mean, I'm sure some things fall through the cracks. I've managed to keep it up, but the column has grown to the point where we get way more than we can deal with. And at this point, I worried, when the podcast started, the submissions started to come in at a greater clip, and we started to get a little overwhelmed. And at that point, I was allowed to bring a reader on. Up until then, so for the first decade, 11 years or so, 12 years, it was just me. And then I was able to bring on a reader, not as a full-time employee, hardly. I was able to bring on a college student who was just really promising. She'd helped with a college essay contest, and she was a freshman in college, a freshman at Columbia University, and she beat out all these people for this internship. She was just so good. I had no intention of hiring a freshman, but I didn't even know she was a freshman until she'd already sort of won the job, and but she was so good that not long after that, the podcast started, submissions went up, my time went down, and I said, can I bring her on as a college student just to get a monthly stipend and to read? And they said yes, and she did, and helped enormously with the reading just in her spare time for a couple of years, actually for 3 years, until she graduated, which was 2 years ago. And as soon as she graduated, I was like, can we hire her? And luckily they said yes. So now she's the Modern Love Project's assistant, and she reads, we started this new column called Tiny Love Stories, which is 100-word love story. She's pretty much solely in charge of that, or we do it together and I top edit it, but she does most of the selecting and preliminary editing and working with writers. And she helps with all the coordination that has to happen with the Amazon TV show, which started last year. And we're bringing the podcast, which was a collaboration with WBUR in Boston. The final episode of that collaboration came out this week. And that will become a New York Times podcast that we're working on now and figuring out what it's going to be and what it's going to include. But she and I will, the plan is for she and I to be voices on that podcast. We'll see how it goes, but and with the plan to launch that as soon as we can figure out what it is and come up with some episodes and be assured that the process is one that can continue every week. So she's got a lot on her plate. What's funny about the submission process is that even I feared that when the Amazon show came out, which came out a year ago in October, that the submissions would sort of go through the roof, and they did go up, but not completely beyond our ability to respond to them. But when they did, it was with the pandemic, where they pretty much doubled, and it was already beyond our capacity to respond. But I guess it was a combination of a lot of people working from home or being laid off, having time on their hands, with feeling like they were living through something that was really impacting their relationship, something that was different, something that made them want to sit down and write. So it just went beyond our ability to respond. And we typically would have 700 or 800 in the inbox at any one time. And we'd always be working through those to get the number, keep the number from going above that. Right now it's at 3,000. And we're both scared to venture in to the inbox. But in July and August, we started this a few years ago, we shut down new submissions, just so that we can go through and catch up on the old ones. So just in a few days, it will close down, and we'll do our best to go through those 3,000 submissions and see what's in there. In terms of what, I'll talk for about 10 more minutes. In terms of what we look for, the three qualities in varying degrees that everything we publish has is vulnerability, generosity, and wisdom. And the three most popular essays we've ever published exemplify each of those with a different emphasis. But anything that we publish has either all three of those in obvious ways, or one of them emphasized in a particular way. And interestingly, I think those are the three qualities that also define good relationships. And so there's a lot of overlap. I'm not saying like that good writers have good relationships. In fact, it's probably the opposite. but the three qualities are in the qualities of good writing and good relationships are so similar. The most popular essay we ever published, which is the most popular by a long way, was called "To Fall in Love with Anyone Do This." And it was about a study by the psychologist Arthur Aaron, who had wanted to find out if you could increase the chances of people falling in love scientifically. So it was this famous 36 questions to fall in love, which weren't famous when he did it, but became very famous from this column, which has been read tens of millions of times. And what was so interesting about the column was, and the concept was this idea that that you have to be vulnerable to fall in love, but it's terrifying, and what's terrifying about it is the potential imbalance of you being vulnerable and the other person not being vulnerable. So is there a way to balance that? And I think the brilliance of these questions is that they balance it. Each person has to answer, and they get increasingly probing as you go through these 3 sets of 12 questions. So the whole piece was overtly about vulnerability, and she was doing those questions with someone who was just a mere acquaintance from the climbing gym that she attended, and it worked. At the end of the questions, you then are supposed to stare into each other's eyes for 4 minutes, which is a really long time to like stare into someone's eyes. And they did that, and what she learned about it was not necessarily that you fall in love as a result of that, but you get to know someone. Really, it's impossible not to get to know someone if you do it with integrity. I mean, you could blow it off, or one person could not really answer authentically, but if you do it with any level of integrity, it's impossible not to get to know someone really deeply. And if you get to know someone really deeply, your chances of falling in love with that person go up. And she did, and it wasn't that they were swept off their feet that night, but within a month or so, they were pretty solidly together, and they still are. So it was sort of an irresistible concept and column, and it just, I've never seen anything like it. It was the most read Time story of that year, and continues to this day. It may be one of the most, actually, it wasn't her column, but my, I did a sidebar that had a little 3-paragraph introduction, and then listed the 36 questions. And that sidebar is, I think, the most viewed New York Times piece ever published, which is just sort of ridiculous. Outside of I think the 2016 election page, which wasn't an article, I think it's the most viewed thing that they published that has a byline. Anyway, so that piece was about vulnerability. The second most popular piece that we published was by a writer named Amy Krauss Rosenthal, and it was called "You May Want to Marry My Husband." And this was a children's book author who was in the last stages of ovarian cancer, and wrote a piece in the form of a dating profile for her husband to find someone after she died. And it was submitted just into our general email inbox, and then sat there for over a week. I mean, we don't get to stuff for months sometimes, but it sat there for over a week. And then her agent sent it, realizing that we didn't have much time. Her agent sent it to Pamela Paul, who's the book review editor, hoping that she could forward it directly to me because she didn't have my email address. And Pamela Paul was on vacation, and so it took a couple more days to get to me from her. And she, being on vacation, just forwarded it to me and said, "I haven't read this, but I know this person." Like, she didn't even know what it was about or anything. She just like forwarded it and said, "I haven't read this, but leave it up to you." And my first thought was, what condition is she in now? Like, it just, it seemed very advanced. And so we went about publishing it right away, which required me having a conversation with her. Like, it had to be edited, everybody's got to be edited. And so we had a long conversation about ways the piece needed to be changed and whatever. And it was a painful conversation because she actually couldn't talk at certain points during the conversation, but her agent was on the line as well and would sort of helped her through, or could answer in her place in certain cases. We shifted the schedule around and got it published. But by the time it came out, she was no longer really aware. And then she died 10 days after it was published. And it was such a moving piece. And I hadn't really, I was surprised by the reaction, honestly, because to me, and this is a little bit what it's like to be an editor as opposed to a reader, like, even though I knew the piece was good and justified itself and all of that, it didn't move me in the ways that it would move readers. Like, to me, it came as a problem. Like, any piece I'm working on is a problem. It's full of problems, and you're sort of problem solving. And this one, because it was a rush, it was had even more problems and was harder to get published. And so by the time it came out, I hadn't really been moved by it. And then I was sort of surprised when other people were. And I was moved like later when I sort of realized what had happened, what the outpouring was. But it was really, again, a phenomenon that just raced around the world and had, millions of views in one day. And my boss at the time was in Europe watching television, and it appeared in the ticker along the bottom of some like French news report as like children's book author, whatever. I don't even remember what it was, but he sent me the screenshot of, like, that was the day that it came out. Anyway, that was a piece about generosity, and it was so striking how in this moment, and she also had 2 children or 3 children who were all in their teens, I think, and maybe one younger. But during this, really the last moments of her life, she's thinking about her husband and wanting him to be able to move on and find love. And he was, I guess they were both in their mid 40s or early 50s. And she was like, he's going to be alive a lot of years, and I don't want him, being alone. So it succeeded. It was mostly about that. It was mostly about how love is thinking of other people first. Then the third piece was from a long time ago, 2006. So a little less than 2 years into the column. And it was called What Shamu Taught Me About a Happy Marriage. And this was a piece about wisdom. The writer, Amy Sutherland, was writing a book about an exotic animal training academy in Southern California, and how you go about preparing animals for essentially to do tricks. It wasn't like a wildlife preserve or something. These are like animals, like intelligent animals, and how do you get them to do things? How do you train them? And at some point during her observation of this, she realized that humans are animals, and that her husband was an animal, that the same techniques that they were using on these exotic animals would work to improve her marriage. And they were hilarious. I mean, some of them were, a lot of it was just about ignoring behavior that you want to end and praising behavior that you want to encourage, that you can't get an elephant to balance a ball on its head by nagging at it. You have to ignore it when it's goofing off and acting up, and you have to praise it to the skies and give it tons of food when it does what you want. And she thought, well, I wonder if that works with Scott, her husband. Um, and the other kind of charming aspect to it was how you can get an animal to move in the ways that you want, and that too was all through encouragement and lure, change. She referred to it as changing their movement patterns. And Scott had always pestered her in the kitchen when she was cooking, and like put his hands in the food she was making, and it just drove her up the wall. So she tried putting a bowl of chips and salsa on a table away from the island where she was working. And she was like, and sure enough, like he'd come into the kitchen, and instead of coming to where I was, he'd move over toward the bowl of chips and salsa. And it was totally like patronizing towards men through most of it. But then he ends up using it on her at the end. So it sort of balanced itself out. But it was full of wisdom and how, it was sort of a how-to in that way. And interestingly, all three of these essays also covered the three phases of love that everything we publish practically also centers around, which is finding love, which is what the vulnerability essay was about, losing love, which was what the generosity essay was about, and how to keep love alive, which is what Amy Sutherland's essay was about. Almost everything we publish is one of those three situations. So I guess I'll stop there and see what the questions are. But that's sort of the thumbnail sketch of what the column is, what its range is, and what it does well when it does it well.
Oh, Dan, thank you so much. I was laughing so hard. I remember that Shamu one, and it really was funny. But it was so great how you broke it down, and I love hearing the history of it. And I should have said at the start how it's a podcast and a TV show. I mean, it's unbelievable where it's gone, right? You're the modern love guy, Dan.
We're trying to. The pandemic, pretty much brought Hollywood to a standstill. So the season 2 was supposed to be done by now. It was supposed to be filmed starting in mid-March, and that's all been wiped off. And Amazon Studios, everything is shut down in a holding pattern, and they're trying to figure out how to get things started and what the protocols are and all of that. But that TV show was the time of my life. I had such a good time participating in that, and loved the people who worked on it.
Pause. We're just on pause. You'll get there again. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen, just because I'm not sure. She's been reading how people, how the students would like to ask questions. Hey, Jen, what should we do? You're muted, but.
So I'm promoting our students to panelists so we can see them. And then the Q&A, it looks like Victoria, do you want to ask Victoria's question in the Q&A, and I'll continue promoting people? Can you see it?
Oh, I need to go into the chat?
Do you see the Q&A at the bottom? I can read it for you. So Victoria, I'll read the first one.
Okay.
Are you ready? How was working with your wife on it in the early days? Do you have more than one reader aside from the former intern and you?
Working with my wife was fun. It was nice to have a project together. I think it would have been stressful if it had continued, because I think there would be a natural competition over how well, like if she was going to do half the essays and I was going to do half. I don't think that's the best prescription for a successful relationship, to have that kind of like who's going to do it better kind of thing, and be doing the exact same thing, and who's going to do it better. So I'm glad it wasn't a two-person job, but she and I are particularly good in planning stages of things, And whether it's like, you know, renovating a kitchen or planning a trip or something like that, we're sort of at our best doing that. And so I feel like we did that with this column. Like we spent months trying to figure out what it should be and what the parameters should be and what the material should be. And then she stepped aside and it was launched. So I think it was good in that way. The second question of, does anyone read besides the two of us? The answer is no. And we get constant offers of people volunteering to read, but it's a security issue with the time. You have to read within the time system. There's no farming it out. So it has to be, it's sort of limited to just the two of us. It goes beyond us when it comes to pieces we want to solicit opinions about. There are other editors and styles, including the deputy editor, one of the deputy editors who I work with very closely on everything I do. And she can be a reader, but it's always something's being passed along to her for an opinion. Similarly, I kind of consider people readers who are people, you know, I trust, like Anne, you know, is the kind of person who would send something along. Other writers I know and trust, agents, book publicists. There's a lot of pre-reading and selecting being done before things are passed along, which is helpful.
Great, thank you. If I'll read Mary's question, and if other people want to raise their hands or just put it in the Q&A. So Mary asks, out of the top 3 most popular stories, why is Amy Rosenthal's the only one included in the collection?
Really, is that true? I'd have to look at the collection. I don't know. We had an earlier collection, and this collection came out to be coordinated. This newest collection came out to be coordinated with the show, and I had about a month to remove about half the essays and update it with the essays that were going to be in the TV show, plus like 20 more or 18 more or something like that. So I think mostly I was just trying to create an interesting mix that was different kinds of writers and situations and demographics, subject matter. And it's one of these things where it's better to have less time. Where there was the first time I did the collection, I had a lot more time, and so I spent a lot of time, and I did a worse job. And this time I had a month, and it was so compressed, you know, having to do my regular work at the same time, that I had, you know, very little time to write an introduction, very little time to organize, and I just had to be super efficient. And I'm so much happier with the result. So it's weird, like, you know, tight deadlines are good. Embrace them. Oh, you're muted, I think.
Raquel, thanks. Raquel, did you want to just go ahead and ask your question?
Okay, I was trying to avoid being on.
No, we want to see you and hear from you.
I can't figure out the Q&A thing. I'm so dumb. Anyway, I was wondering about if you receive or like percentage or, you know, approximate percentage wise, how many do you find in the slush pile as opposed to who works that are actually, you know, sent by someone they know that you know.
I mean, the vast majority come out of the slush pile. That was always the idea. And honestly, the slush pile is still where agents, you know, will often send, like, it's that still becomes the repository of all that stuff. And I prefer everything to go there because often then my colleague Mia will read it first. and it'll come to me with either a strong recommendation, a mild recommendation, no recommendation, or she'll reject it herself. So that's helpful to me. Stuff that comes to me directly, which is the vast minority. I mean, if we have 3,000 in the slush pile, the stuff that finds its way to me directly is, maybe I have 40 in there. But those people don't get an auto response. So when I take a month, 2 months, 3 months to get back to them, they start to write to me and say, did you get it? Which is totally irritating because those are just not emails I want to waste my time on. Whereas people who submit, like I'm a rule follower and I like rule followers. And so to me, it's just all about the piece, and there's no, there's no sort of express lane. Sometimes people will get express treatment just by accident, because I'll be looking for something and I'll be looking either in my own box or the main box through subject lines. If something jumps out as being a particularly intriguing subject line, I'll pluck things out. Sometimes I'll go into the box just to see what the numbers are and what's there, and also to weed out spam and that sort of thing. And I'll see something that just came in that day. And if I start to read it and it's interesting, I'll keep reading it. And if it justifies itself, I write to the person and take it on. And someone who submitted something has it appear 5 days later. So it's all over the place. But the most common process is by far is material getting taken from the main inbox, waiting months for it to be read, and then having it come out a few weeks after I get in touch.
Thank you. So I see Victoria Fortune, you had your hand up, and then Katie Hughes.
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So we get to see the models of what worked by reading the column, and we get to hear your tips about what to do, but what would you say to not do, and what immediately makes you roll your eyes and toss something aside, or things you've seen a million times, or like, what would you say not to do for sure? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question, because the one thing that I've gotten better at, just in terms of evaluating submissions, because the time is so crunched, I do look, I sort of scan very quickly for telltale signs of something that's not going to get better. And I'm always looking for for a voice that's vulnerable and not show-offy. But that also translates to your, most people write just a little cover note, just something short that says who they are. And even someone who in that note says, I'm sure you'll like this, or has, is overly, pitching too strongly. There's something about being aggressive about your talents that doesn't fit with being vulnerable in an essay. It's like two different voices. If you're vulnerable in an essay, you're not sure of yourself, like you're not, and it always seems weird when someone writes, oh, well, I've been published here, here, and here, and this is going to be perfect for you. And then I don't anticipate that person has been through something that's humbling. They sound cocky instead. So that's always sort of a disconnect. That's a bit of a turnoff, or a bit of a clue, I guess, that I don't think it's going to work. The other thing I look for are lazy adjectives. If you used like the word amazing early in an essay, I can guarantee you the essay isn't going to get any better. It's just not, She was amazing, maybe, but this essay is not going to be. I will often read, I often think writers are horrified to hear this, but I'll start to read at the beginning. And if it's not engaging, I don't stop. I start to skip around. And I'm basically looking for some intelligent emotional germ of something that could work. And sometimes I'll skip around and find that line or that paragraph or whatever within the essay. If I don't, I'll go to the end and I'll read the last few lines. And the ending of these essays is super important. And if the ending of an essay is like some simplistic sentiment, I guess, you know, and then, you know, we moved in together and all was well. You know, if it's some sentiment like that, and I know that it tells me that the whole essay was leading toward, you know, sort of a Hallmark card, and it's not, I don't need to go back and read my way to that. I'm sure I've missed some good essays with that, by that process. You know, things can be made of situations, even if they aren't well written or they have mistakes or whatever. But typically those are the things I've started to rely on as clues, because I just don't have the time. I've got about 10 or 15 seconds per essay. And I'm going to use that well. I'm going to skim around and try to, you know, find signs of intelligent life. And if I don't, then I move on.
Katie and then Sarah Dunham.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Question about rejected material. Are there ever times when you reject a piece but recommend it to either a colleague or recommend to the writer that, you know, maybe suggest a different place for them to submit it because it's just not the right piece for you?
Pretty rarely. And the only times that I do, like, I'm not really honestly that familiar with other publications that publish essays and what they're doing and what they're publishing. I honestly am a total news junkie, and in my free reading, I consume news, and I'm not typically reading other essay columns. I do. There is a column similar to Modern Love in the Well section of the Times called Ties, and it's essays about family. I've definitely referred things to her. It's a woman named Roberta Zeff, and she will refer things to me on occasion. And then we have, Styles has occasional essays under different headings, like they'll call it first person, and they'll run a 2,000 word essay or a 1,000 word essay. It's pretty flexible, but it's irregular, and often those are edited by my colleague and the deputy editor. Her name's Anya Stremian, and you know, often I'll get something that is, it's not really, I mean, the boundaries for Modern Love are pretty broad, but it just doesn't really fit, but it's really good. And under the heading first person, you can put almost anything that's first person. So that can be a good place. And if there's something that's strong that I wish I could publish, but it doesn't fit, she almost always publishes it.
Next, can I go? Oh, hi, I can't hear. Can you hear me?
I can hear.
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm a huge fan. I love what your column does for essays and storytelling in America and around the world. I just wondered, I know a lot of new authors and unknown authors have published a beautiful essay, and I'm wondering what's your favorite success story of someone that was unknown and their essay caught the attention of agents, writers, or publishers, if you have one?
I have so many. Honestly, I have so many. It's been totally It's one of the most satisfying things about this work, honestly. Um, I think something like 60 or more book deals have come directly from Modern Love columns. Um, Movie options and those kinds of things. And with the Amazon show, TV episodes. So that's been a great part of it. And I mean, one of the ones I'm proudest of, just because it was such a brave essay, is a young Indian American writer named Bindu Bansanath, who published a piece a few years ago. She had been sexually molested by her uncle for years, when she was in her early teens. And I guess she was, how old? I can't remember. She must have been like 15 or 16 when she read, at someone's recommendation, or an English teacher's recommendation, read Lolita, and first saw herself in it, in a glamorous way that made her feel good, and then saw how the kind of power she had by being, how she had power in being in this relationship. She wasn't powerless. She could use his weakness to her advantage. And she hadn't seen that clearly before. And she wrote this essay that was about that. She was 21 when she wrote the essay. She was a senior in college, and wrote just a fantastic essay about that. It was a very difficult essay to publish. It took months. We had to have our legal department look into, because then she learned that she could go to a teacher about what had been happening to her. The teacher would be required by law to report it, and he was like arrested and found guilty and spent time in prison. Wow. We had to see all that through and look at all the legal implications of that. And I had to wait a long time with her to make sure that this was something she really wanted to go forward with, because she's young and people like to get published. And so I felt like I had to protect her in that way and let it sit for a while. And then it even worried me when it came out that she might have regrets. But she got so much interest from Hollywood and whatever, and she didn't know how to deal with it, and I didn't either. But I got her set up with a really good agent through the Andrew Wiley Agency, which is a top agency, who took her on. Helped her navigate all of that. And now she's written about, she got an internship at New York Magazine, and she's still only 23, I guess, 24. But it's the perfect, it was just sort of the perfect scenario where that experience informs everything she writes, but she's writing about a much broader array of things now. She wrote a piece for the Times Magazine, but it was just great because I felt like she's incredibly talented, has a lot of sort of material that she can use in interesting ways, and I felt like I was the conduit to get her to where she needed to be, and just felt good. Yeah.
Wow, thank you. It's quite an answer.
I don't see any more hands up. I'm sure there are more questions.
I have
in fact, yeah, good. I thought you might. Yeah.
Dan, I actually talked to you about this before, which is why I thought what you said. I'm not asking you to say the same thing, but one of my favorite modern loves is the one where the young woman works in the florist shop, like the bouquet of fleeting or something. And that came right over the slush pile. But you said there was something unusual about it, like the lead came later or something. Do you remember it? I don't want to put you on the spot, but that's one of my favorites.
It's called One Bouquet of Fleeting Beauty, Please.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I use it when I teach. I use it a lot.
Yeah, she's someone I got to know. She lives out on the West Coast, but wanted to, there was a time, she works as a book publicist at Counterpoint Press, I think. It might be in Portland, Oregon. But she was interested in moving to New York and came to New York. It was just a couple of years ago, and got in touch, and yeah, so we went out and had lunch and walked around and all of that. But she's lovely and talented. But the piece was about, it was very poetic. It was about how working in a, she just begins it with this authority of working in a flower shop and what people come to a flower shop for, and what kind of people come for what reasons and all of that. And then about a third of the way in or so, because people are coming for flowers for funerals and for different whatever, and about a third of the way in, or maybe even more, it comes out that her boyfriend, she's young, early 20s, her boyfriend had committed suicide. And she's trying to sort of work her way through appreciating what they had, even though it didn't last, and comparing that to flowers, essentially, that are, and that's what the title was, you know, it's like fleeting beauty, and seeing the value of something that's beautiful for a moment. But oh my God, it was so just really powerfully done. And I don't remember whatever I told you about the process of publishing it.
I just remember that one of the things we talked about was how, as an editor, you might have felt like, oh, we need to move this up, but the way she did it, sort of burying the important part, no pun intended, but
yeah,
so strongly in this. And I so agree. It's one of the things I love about it, which is that you just don't know that that's where you're going, but she gets there.
It may have been that I added that to it, where she had said at the top that had happened, and instead we moved it in. Maybe I don't know. It's
just the shape of the essay is so different. That is one of the reasons I love it. But
yeah, there's a lesson in that, because one common mistake is people revealing too much early on in a personal essay. And you know, it's just like a short story. Like, you want to grab someone's attention and then start to feed the stuff. Once you have their attention, then you can sort of drag it out. And there are too many times when someone will say, like, I met my future husband. It's like, well, don't tell us that. Like, let that be discovered along the way. Like, those sorts of details, like if there's something that can be put off, and let the reader discover, put it off, hook us with something irresistible, but let the story unfold.
Yeah. Jen, do we have another question? Because I can keep going.
We have one. Well, if Brooks wants to ask a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated to hear about the Lolita essay, because it's an excellent argument against censorship. I personally have always had mixed feelings about Lolita because of its disturbing subject matter, and so have a lot of prospective censors since the book's publication. And they rightly point out there's a lot of immorality in what's going on. But I attended a censored books lecture at the Miquelot Library, and one of the librarians spoke about the fact that she never censors books because you never know why someone could want them and what they could take for them. So my question is, do you often see essays in which, or are the essays that you're drawn to essays which illuminate something that you might not otherwise have thought of, or encourage you to see something in a new way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're this immersed in material constantly, it can have a dulling effect on my own brain and my eyes and all of that. And I sort of think that's necessary to the process because it makes the fresh material demand to be seen in a way. Like it just, I sort of get dulled into thinking I'm never going to read good writing again. And maybe I'm just too burned out for this. But I feel like it's in that state when some voice sort of comes up and says like, hey, listen to me, like I got a story for you that you haven't heard before. And it's so refreshing to get that. And one reason the slush pile, and again, for me, it's not the slush pile, it's the main event. I think at a book publisher, it's the slush pile, and a lot of magazines is the slush pile, but for me, it's the main event. And it's so much, I'm in so much of a better position approaching a piece with no expectations. When I get stuff from established writers or through an agent, and excluded, I come to it with a thought of like, oh, this is going to be good. And that's not a good place to start with reading something and considering it for publication. It's better to start like with, oh, I'm never going to see anything good again. Like this stuff is all horrible. And when you open something with sort of low expectations and the voice starts to charm you, and you feel like you sort of get carried away and you feel you're more easily impressed. And that's sort of a good place to be. That I wonder, agents are very good at what they do, and my colleagues are very good at what they do, but it's so important that when they pass things along, they don't overhype it. And that urge from agents is especially hard to sort of rein in. They want to sell their clients' work, and I think with book publishers, when a book publisher is getting everything that's being hyped by an agent, it has sort of a leveling effect. But with me, it raises expectations, and then it doesn't deliver, and I'm more disappointed instead of just sort of more of the same. And I wish people wouldn't do that. I wish they wouldn't say like, I was blown away by this piece, and I'm sure you will be too. Like, don't do it. Like people who are in my position, wherever they are, at a magazine or whatever, all day long you're pitched, all day long. And you don't want to be pitched. You're sick of it. You don't want people to tell you what you should be doing. You just want to be entranced and entertained. So I always stress that. It's not about the cover letter. It's not about your writing credits. It's all just, hi, I'm so-and-so. I live in Denver, Colorado. I teach 3rd grade. Here's my story. Like, it's all anyone wants to know.
Dan, this is a question some of the students I just posted questions, but someone is looking for recommendations or what's the key to writing about loss? How to, without being sentimental, or what do you look for in an essay like that?
Loss is tough because it's the main thing that it's the vast majority of what we get. And it's the vast majority of what any essay column gets, regardless of subject. And I think that's because anything that has an open submission policy and is getting stuff from writers and non-writers alike, writers are more comfortable writing about all kinds of subjects. Non-writers mostly are spurred to write when someone dies. And so we get way too much of it. And for what the column's about, I mean, a lot of the most moving and powerful stuff we've written, that we've published, and Amy Krouse Rosenthal's essays among them, are about loss and about death, and about more frequently about death from cancer than anything else. But the sheer volume of that means that the rate of acceptance for a non-loss essay or a non-death essay is probably like 1 in 80, and the rate of acceptance for a loss essay is probably like 1 in 1,000. Like it's the hardest. There are not enough spaces for it. There's too much material, and you just you're setting your competition bar at an extremely high level. In terms of how it's handled, part of why it doesn't succeed is there's a lot of impulse to memorialize the person and to write a tribute. There's something that I think of as the tribute essay, where the person is dead and can't speak for themselves. So you don't write about the bad stuff, you write about the good stuff. And it becomes an essay that's more important to the writer than to a broader readership.
Mhm. Mhm. I think we have one more question, Dan, before we let you go, because we've kept you here the whole time. Thank you so much again for being
Yeah,
here.
fun.
What percentage of submissions are not about romantic love? Say they're about love of a child or a friend or a parent. That is a good question.
I would say about 2/3 to 3/4 are about romantic love. Yeah, maybe closer to 2/3. I'm not sure exactly, but I really like. I mean, the really deep stuff is often family stuff. Like that's where parents and children, like that's just such rich stuff, and so I'd say the percentage of that stuff that gets taken just because it has more potential is higher. But I also want to see, and a lot of what readers want to see is what is like dating today, and what are the particular challenges and stuff of dating today. And I have to say, I've been disappointed. We've gotten so much material during coronavirus that I can't even speak about what's in there because I don't know. I've just sort of been cherry picking and trying to find things here and there. So I don't even know what's in there, but I haven't gotten, and I think it's too late now. I didn't get an essay about what it's like to be single and totally in isolation and trying to date online. I got perspectives on that weren't all that surprising or smart. But I really thought, and I tried to I actually approached a writer about it, and she tried something, but it didn't work. It seemed like such a unprecedented moment of 2 months, maybe not even, where people truly were isolating and truly were having relationships only online, and where did those relationships go, and what was fraught about them. And I didn't get that, and I think maybe it's not too late, but I want that kind of stuff. Like I want what's happening now, what's different about what's happening now. And I've talked a lot about the things I get too much of, and that I don't get enough smart stuff about that.
Mm-hmm. You're wonderful, Dan. I can't believe you've been so wonderful and generous. Jen, do we have any? We're done, right? I said that was the last question. We have to
I
stick.
think so. Yeah, we have to follow the rules, right?
Yeah. We're rule followers, Dan.
Yeah.
We owe you the biggest dinner. Sometime
we do.
when we're all free again, or in New
can't
York,
wait.
when I can see you there.
Yeah, so looking forward. It was going to be my Thursday commute home, right? I was going to be coming back from New York. I was going to get off the train in West Haven and drive
Yeah, it
out
was
to you
so
guys.
plan.
It was a great plan.
It was such a good plan. We'll put it on hold. We'll get there sometime. Say hello to Kathy for me. And thank
Okay,
you
well,
so much, Dan, for being here. I know.
and thanks everybody.
Thank
Good luck
you.
to all.
Bye.
Thank you.